Hi, my name is Aryan Garg, and this is Lab 4 Two-Dimensional Spring Mass Oscillations for Physics 2211. Today, the purpose of the lab is to essentially analyze the spring mass motion in 2D, then extract x and y coordinates over time using tracker. Then we want to model this motion using Newton's second law, so basically our computation model. Then we want to compare and contrast a computational model with the actual experiment results, and then analyze energy changes as a result and try to see how the energy principle holds up. The main result before we move forward was that the model matches the x as well as the y motion really well, and that the total energy is almost constant with the time period for both x and y being around 1.5 seconds. The physics model is based around these equations where net force is ma, spring force and gravitational force follow these formulas. The kinetic energy is half mv squared, and the potential energy of gravity, mgy, and spring half ks, L minus L naught squared. The system and assumptions we'll be using is the system is the mass on the spring, and surroundings are earth and the spring's support. Some assumptions we'll be making is that there's a 2D motion, abiding by Hooke's law, and there is no air resistance. The initial conditions are as follows, with the mass, spring constant, as well as the initial length being preset. The initial position for our case is this. There is a velocity of 0.404. Obviously, g is 9.8. The experimental setup involved us picking option 1, which is the pre-downloaded video, loading it into tracker, and calibrating it using the axes as well as the calibration stick measurement that was stated in the pre-lecture video. We used a tracker on this video to then track it in 2D, get the x and y coordinates, save it as a CSV file for our computational model. The computational model has two forces that it accounts for, spring as well as gravitational force. The net force is just a sum of these. We update the velocity and position on each time step, and then we compare the model results to the tracker results. When we compare the x position versus time graph, we get the following graph, with the blue being the model and the red being the experimental. On the y position versus time graph, we see the model and experimental. As we can see, both of them align fairly closely. The energy changes throughout this entire motion, basically in the kinetic as well as the gravitational and spring potential energy, as well as the total energy can be seen in this graph over here. What does this mean is that the energy principle we'll be looking at means that total energy should remain nearly constant with small fluctuations that we allow due to numerical errors. What we see from our results before is that this principle is approximately satisfied. If you look at the period in the x direction, we essentially need to look at two peaks in the x direction. Here we're picking the first peak at time 1.235. The next peak is at 2.849, which means the time period between the two peaks, or the period in the x direction, is 1.5 seconds approximately. When we do the same for y, we see again t equals 0.475 as the first peak, second 1.994 seconds, with again the time between peaks being 1.5 seconds approximately. What we get from this period comparison is that the period in the x and the y directions is almost the same, with some slight differences, which could be due to their coupled motion. Now, talking lastly about the sources of error, that could be due to tracker measurement errors, some calibration errors, maybe how the stick was configured and exactly where on the black object it extends to. Some initial conditions may be off, and the time step may not be correct because the professor in the initial video may not release the spring mass as elegantly, or he may impart some velocity to it. So yeah, the conclusion essentially is that Newton's second law predicts 2D motion fairly well. Our model aligns very well with the experiment. Energy is approximately conserved, and x and y oscillations have similar periods. Thank you so much.